Hey guys, just had an amazing conversation with my friend Jared Neusch and my new friend Connor Shram. These guys, we've had Jared on before, and I go back 10 years with him. It's kind of crazy. And we've just stayed connected over the years, and we've had him on the podcast, as I said. And then Connor, a friend of Jared's, they wrote a book together, a children's book called Jesus versus the Bad Guys. And Derek and I have talked about this for years, that we don't have enough content for our kids that is grace-based Trinitarian, about a Father who doesn't look away, God in Christ reconciling the world. This book is in that vein, and man, this conversation was so much fun. Let me read a little bit. This is Jesus is for kids. This book is about raising our kids in the way of Jesus. It's that Jesus hermeneutic approach. It's about how much fun Jesus is. It's a fun book too, well illustrated, fart cannons and sharks and lasers, and it's got a Jesus riding a T-Rex. It's just fun. It's fun. And this conversation, so it breaks down the book. It breaks down how those guys met. How long they've been working on the project. The book is about how Jesus overcomes evil. Does he beat up the bad guy? Does he ride a T-Rex to stop them? Or does he defeat bad guys through love and forgiveness? So this book is about how Jesus overcomes evil, and this conversation ultimately takes us there. And we kind of get into the deep end a little bit in stunning ways. Jared and Connor both are incredible communicators and well-versed in the love of God. And so we dive into retributive justice versus restorative justice. We dive into Christian pacifism. We even talk about Jesus in the temple with a whip, and what it looks like to be restrained in love, while stepping in between the oppressed and the oppressor. Jared walks us into Revelation, the book of Revelation, and breaks some of that down. It all makes sense, and come full circle back to this book. I'm excited about this book. I don't have littles right now, and we can see grands from here, but my wife especially is always looking for content for the day that we get grandkids, and so this one is a definite yes. I think this is going to really encourage you guys. There's a lot here. All right. We have a Rethinking God with Tacos Facebook group that is growing and is a beautiful place to connect. I encourage you to check it out, to join. Lots of wonderful conversations with a culture of kindness. At times there can be disagreements, but we're learning how to disagree without having that be cause for disconnect. And so I'm so grateful for what's happening there. I also encourage you to go to afamilystory.org and sign up for our mailing list. It's how you'll keep up with us, keep up with this podcast, keep up with new books and conferences that we're either releasing or going to be a part of in the days ahead. We also let folks know about community Zoom calls that we do. So I'd recommend that you go there. At afamilystory.org. Afamilystory.org is where you can also give. We're listener supported. Family Story is a nonprofit, and very grateful when you partner with us that way. That's a helpful thing, and I'm honored when that happens. Instagram. Join us on Instagram. Lots of snippets, reels, memes. Every once in a while, I'll do a live video there. It's been a minute, but we'll do that again. You can follow us there, and I think on any other social. If you have time, write a review on iTunes or Spotify. Let folks know about the podcast. And last, if you've ever read anything I've written, and I don't ask this very often, and it's blessed you, I would be honored if you went to Amazon and wrote a review. That's always helpful. Love doing this. Loved this conversation. I've learned so much through these conversations. and I'm honored every time I get to have them. I feel the same about this one with Jared Neusch and Connor Shram. This is Jesus versus the bad guys. Hey guys, we're doing this. A little bit of technical difficulty, but on my end, but I figured it out, and we're doing this. Man, Jared, it's good to have you back. Connor, good to meet you. I know you're a fellow Canadian in Saskatoon. We were talking about that before I hit record.
Yeah, that's right. And I heard you survived one of our winters, or
Yes.
You were visiting. Was that right? Saskatoon?
Visiting Saskatoon in the dead of winter, when I discovered that everything in Saskatoon can be done underground or indoors.
That's right. That's right. When we moved here, we moved in January, and we moved from British Columbia, and I didn't have a winter coat. And the other kids were like, "Hey, you shouldn't go." I was like, "I need some fresh air. It's really stuffy in here." They're like, "You shouldn't go outside without a jacket." I was like, "It can't be that bad." And then like my lungs were on fire, and I thought I was dying, and kind of was. And so it's a different experience altogether.
Yeah. And for those that don't know, the west coast of Canada, BC, Vancouver Island, is the Florida of Canada, both where the elder folks retire, and also, and I lived there for a season, and also a balmy, their winters are balmy compared to the rest of Canada. They might get a little bit of snow, so because of the air currents. But yeah, I was there when I was 18 as a roadie for Phil Driscoll. That's a whole nother life.
Wow.
Oh
man, I got lots of questions for you on that. That sounds like a fun time.
We'll stay on after and tell those stories. But guys, we're on this call because you guys wrote a book, Jesus versus the Bad Guys, for kids. And it's amazing. And thematically, right where we're running with a Jesus hermeneutic and an incredible message. I know your heart, Jared, because we've had you on before and we've been connecting over the years. But share a little bit about who you guys are and maybe how you met, and then let's get into how this book came about and what your heart is behind.
Connor, do you want to lead us?
Sure. Yeah, it's been quite the journey to get here, because Jared and I first started talking about this book. It wasn't really a book at first. It was just us trying to figure out, as dads, wanting to raise our kids in the Jesus way, in the way of peace, going, how do we convey these ideas? And Jared and I have this joke that we run a personal podcast for each other, because we send each other voice memos that are usually about a minimum of 5 minutes. Sometimes they run as long as 15. And so it's like, hey, forgive the personal podcast, but I've got some thoughts. I've got some ideas.
Love it.
And so we were personal podcasting to each other, and we just started talking about, like, there might be a way to approach talking about Jesus like a superhero. And that connected to this idea I had from a conversation with a pastor friend of mine. He texted me. He's like, I'm just leaving the theater from taking my kids to see the movie Wonder Woman. And he's like, we liked it, but my younger son, he goes, I wish Jesus was cool like Wonder Woman. Like, I know he saves the world and everything, but like Wonder Woman, she's pretty cool. And he's like, I wish I could convey the heroism in Jesus' sacrifice in a way kids would understand.
Yeah.
And so I had that conversation in my mind when Jared and I were podcasting with each other, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And, here we are now, 2 years later, and the book released just yesterday. So we're really excited about it.
Congrats, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, because, we've been friends for, Connor, would you say 10 years now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've probably crossed a decade, which maybe we should be celebrating that more than the book launch, 10-year anniversary. That's a big deal. But yeah, we've been friends for a long time, and, as we said, text, and we even had a season of emailing, like long emails of theological discussion, changing the color of our fonts and responding back and forth. And and then we both started having kids at about the same time. So we each have 3 kids, and they're kind of staggered by 1 year, more or less. And I think, kind of like Connor said, in reading to our kids, we were both on our own theological journeys, but we found ourselves quite dissatisfied with 95 to 99% of the content we had to read to our kids. I found myself doing a lot of editing when I'm reading.
Yeah.
Being like, well, just changing the words and just going, man. And so then rather than just us complaining back and forth to each other about the lack of content that we would want our kids to read at a young age, we were like, well, what if we just wrote our own kids book series, and we were able to convey some of the values that we now have, but I didn't necessarily hold some of these values from the early stages. It was more in my 20s and that I started to shift and change on some of these things. And so, and we're excited to be able to teach our kids and other kids at such a young age, and then go, what will that look like if some of these things can be cemented from such a young age? And then you have these core values and these beliefs about God from the earliest ages, and you're hitting 30, 40, 50. And it's not this exciting new revelation, but it's old hat,
Come on, man. Yeah. My wife, Karen, was a children's pastor, and always on the hunt for content that she didn't have to redact. And, there's even the best Bible she could find, and Jesus is on the cross and he cries out for Papa, and Papa turned away. And you're just like, oh. And so she's, before we left the last church, she found every Bible in there and redacted. It was like a copy of a CIA file where there's so many redactions. But
that's funny.
The Jesus. Go ahead, bro.
I was just going to say that to speak of redactions, we had 2 or 3. You start having kids and families give you gifts. And I went through one evening and I took a Sharpie and same thing, the CAA briefing. And the other day, my son is flipping through them and he's like, what did you Dad, you changed a bunch of stuff in here. Why are these words all? And he's holding it up to the light, trying to figure it out. And I'm like, don't look at it, son. It's too explicit.
That's right. That stuff shouldn't be in there. That is the best, man. Of course, I love that. That actually can open up conversation. Probably. I don't know what age he is, but my son's 22. We're still having. He literally came into the room. This is my office. Came into my office the other night. He's Dad, the 10 virgins. It's like, you come on now. You got to help me. I'm like, hey, we got to go back to Father, forgive them. They know what they do. God in Christ reconciling the world to Himself. And now we can go back and revisit this through that lens. But those conversations, man, priceless. The Jesus way, you guys have said it twice. Let's talk about it.
Gosh. Well, there's so much we could say. I think relating it back to kind of what we were just covering, I think unless you're reading the Greek and the Hebrew, with no aids of any kind, which I'm certainly not, even an adult Bible is bringing in interpretation. You are relying on someone's interpretation of the original text, and then you're kind of having to negotiate the way that they've translated some of these ideas, and then when you then go to a children's Bible, it's like, they've taken the translation to the nth degree, because they are bringing in their own interpretation at a very, very, very high level, because obviously they know kids aren't going to read 5,000 pages of text, and it's not going to be interesting. So then they have to condense and summarize. And so then at that point, you are getting, maybe agenda is a strong word, but huge determined theological systems.
Yeah.
And so that's why we're getting these Bibles and we're like, whoa, okay. Wow, they have really, and that's fair enough, because they kind of have to for a kid's Bible. Yeah. But for us, the Jesus way, what you're referring to, it is the hermeneutic.
Yeah.
It's the way to read. And there are some Bibles that, some kids' Bibles that they make some good strides, and they make some good effort in trying to bring Jesus to the center of things. But for us, there's more work to be done, and there are some places that we think still needed some sharpening or some emphasizing. And so the Jesus way is kind of the central ethic for our reading and why we're trying to bring this in.
Yeah.
For Alicia and I, my wife, when we started having kids, in conversation with Jared and Kezia, it was really important that we led our kids to understand Jesus for who he is and for them to experience him. And I began to feel more and more like Jesus was the team mascot for evangelicalism, for the charismatic Christianity I was born with. They had the Lion of Judah on their jersey, but actually understanding a lion in its actual habitat is far different than just using it as a symbol for the games you're playing. And for us, it was like connected to that, the C.S. Lewis inspiration when he wrote Narnia.
Yeah.
This idea that, the lion is not to be tamed. And I just felt like a lot of the ideas we had about Jesus, a lot of the assumptions that we built into Sunday school and all the practices that come along with that, at best, they were extra. And at worst, they were really harming our kids' ability to have their own relationship with the God revealed in Jesus.
Yeah.
And so the choice to go, hey, we're going to allow Jesus to reveal what God is like. And we're going to make the idea that Jesus reveals the nature of God more important, or I should say more primary than even encouraging our kids to believe in God.
Yeah.
The first step is, this is the picture that you get to see of him. This is the experience you get to have of him. And then you get to decide how to move forward in your own relationship with this God revealed in Jesus.
Yeah.
That became so primary to us that we realized we're going to have to do some rethinking about how we teach this and because a lot of the stuff that we're given in church culture is insufficient if that's your priority.
Yeah. We were off air talking. I learned you guys met at Bethel, which is where I met Jared. Thankful for that house. There were two things that Bill, who pastors that movement in that church, greatly influenced me in. And it was Jesus' perfect theology and God is good. Those two foundational thoughts, which, I grew up in the church, got saved when I was 5, but it was still like mind-blowing to think of. It was like both and mind-blowing and transformative that Jesus is perfect theology. I had a season where I only read the Gospels. It was 2 years where I had to reset my lens. And as I did that, Jesus came to reveal the Father and lived in union with Holy Spirit. And in that context showed us a God who can be trusted in every step of the way. And you can't have intimacy or connection. You can't experience union where there is no trust. So if he isn't always good as Jesus reveals, you can't experience connection. So what you guys are doing, because what happened naturally then was after those 2 years, once I'd reset my lens, I began to tiptoe back into the rest of Scripture. First, the New Testament, it was a little bit safer. And then the Old, rediscovering, as Jared, you'd rephrase it, as a Christocentric hermeneutic, though I didn't have the language yet. That's what I was doing. And for the sake of my kids, I would say this, I want them to be able to access Father's lap. I want them to be able to access who he truly is. I've often said, I don't want my kids just to know the names of God. I want them to have access to an encounter with the interpretation, to actually experience who he is. And I feel like as I'm reading this book, that's what you guys are doing. Because Jared, you're right. What we believe about who God is going to be, when you get to to creating something for kids, you've got to extrapolate down and to the simplest form in which to introduce them to who God is. And if you've got some flaws on your God lens, which I think we all have certainly experienced that, it becomes obvious and glaring at times in our children's content. But this book is actually an invitation to know who he truly is and who we truly are. But did this book start around you guys podcasting to each other around Jesus on a T-Rex? Because the illustration is amazing. What, Danielle Duncan?
Yeah.
Amazing illustration in this book. And so let's talk about the book, though, because it takes us through this idea. It's obviously about forgiveness, but you take us through the life of Jesus, and you take us to the cross, and before the cross with Peter in the garden, which is one of my favorite. You guys did something there that I did in my last book, Leaving and Finding Jesus, with lasers and everything. I didn't have a fart cannon, but we had the lasers. So walk a little bit through the book.
Yeah.
And feel free to respond to anything that I just threw out there too. I know there's a little bit there, but
sure. No, I would say that Jesus riding on a T-Rex is an illustration in our book, along with, fart cannons and sharks with lasers. And for us, that was inspired by the idea that we were troubled by the fact that a lot of the stories about Jesus for kids are a bunch of grown-ups wearing bed sheets talking. And even the miracles of Jesus are hard to depict visually for kids because it looks like somebody's sleeping, or it looks like they're just laying there and then Jesus helps them up. And so it loses a lot of the energy, a lot of the subversive, unexpected surprise and delight that obviously drew children to Jesus in his ministry.
Yeah.
And so we thought, how can we refresh the child's imagination? And so, this book is on forgiveness. It's on peacemaking. And we talk about how if Jesus wanted to take over the world, he could have rode in on a T-Rex. He could have defeated the Romans with fart cannons and sharks and beefy angels. And the fact that he did not do this, the fact that he did not seek a day of revenge against the big bad Romans, that he really did practice loving his enemies at the expense of his own life, really does show us something about forgiveness, that it's not just what we have to do as some kind of economic transaction based on God's sense of divine justice. Forgiveness is actually Jesus' superpower because it reveals the true nature of our enemies, that they are also made in the image of God. And it also creates the road by which our enemies can be redeemed and restored to relationship. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, how we ended up where we are. And yes, it was over really many years of sending each other very long voice memos.
And so there was this this moment where we were trying to get picked up by a publisher. We had an agent and we had the book written, and we were just so pumped about this concept, and we're like, come on. And so we, for part of our pitch video, Connor and I both, without any sort of prepping the kids, and we only did one take, we each handed our sets of kids stacks of books, and we handed them some of the more, like Captain Underpants, Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Some of them were like fun ones, and then we would hand them some of the best kids books that are Christian kids books that we had. I won't list any names, but we had those, and we said, and we filmed those. Which one do you want to read? And then they were all like, and they just grabbed the set of the non-Christian books, so to speak. And we were like, okay, that's interesting. And so then we kind of set that pile aside. And so we just handed them a Bible, a kid's Bible, and said, all right, what stories do you want to read in this Bible? We can read one right now. What do you want to read?
That's
and
cool.
My kids unanimously were like, Jericho, or David and Goliath, or Noah, and all the animals, and then we, and I even did an either or later. I was like, okay, we can read Jesus and some of his miracles and stuff, or we can read, and I picked a few Old Testament stories, and they were all kind of like, Old Testament? can we do that stuff? And it's of course nothing against the gospel writers. I think they did a great job. I don't think I could have written a better gospel. But as Connor mentioned, there is that truth in the gospels that kids were drawn to Jesus like crazy because apparently he was super fun and kids loved being around him. So parents would bring their kids to Jesus. Whereas now, as soon as the sermon starts, parents take their kids away from the room and put them in kids' church, And so I'm like, okay, how do we capture this super magnetic, fun part of Jesus that is missing? I did a poll online and I asked people, when was the last time you had your kids laughing while reading a kid's book about Jesus? It was like never or sometimes. And it was 100% never. And every single person said, my kids never laugh if they're ever reading a book about Jesus. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. And that's a huge problem because that's missing that colorful, fun, dynamic, magnetic part of Jesus that we see in the Gospels. So that's why we were like, if we just try and go off the New Testament stories and we just do parables and we just do miracles, those are amazing. And they are going to mature into knowing those stories and those texts very well. And they're critical. But we've got to adapt to the age of our audience and go, what do they like? And they like fart cannons and they like sharks and they just want to read stories about giants and animals and wars and things like that. So we're like, okay, let's bring those pieces in and how do we do that in a kid's book? And so then you end up with Jesus on the back of a T-Rex.
On the back of a T-Rex. It really is fun. It really is, and really well illustrated. We're in between littles, and we can see grandkids from where we're at. So this is my wife collects. We're waiting for grandkids, so she's collecting. So I showed her this. She was like, "Oh my gosh, this is awesome."
That's great.
The thing I love is connecting our kids to Jesus. I mean, that's it, right? I mean, he's the most relational. The kids were drawn to him.
Mm-hmm.
But you're also running at some major themes. How does Jesus overcome evil? Yeah. And you're running at it from a beautiful place. The finished work of the cross, of course, is where you take them. And, you recognize even, I think you juxtapose bullying, so that kids can understand the conversation and how to overcome evil. Does he beat up the bad guy? Or does he ride in on a T-Rex? Mm-hmm. Or is it about, Father, forgive them? Is it about a love that is reconciling? I love at the end how you note that, if you punch a bully, he'll punch you harder. If you kick a bully, he'll kick you harder. If you forgive, and to tie that together, the cause and effect is a beautiful way to bring this about. Off the air, or before we hit record, I jokingly said that you guys are each other's yes and guys. And this is what we do on the podcast. We try and have a better thought about God today than we had yesterday. I mean, that's it. It's as simple as that. And I have a few guys that I would call over the years, and I'd say I have a really good thought about God that might offend some folks, but I know you'll say yes. And and this is one of those thoughts that in our world is probably offensive to those who have been raised in the context of separation and therefore participate in a justice that is retributive as opposed to restorative. And so you guys are obviously going at this for the kids, but how did you get there? Because this is the journey, right?
Totally. Yeah. One of the big things that came up in our ongoing conversations was this idea that we would have to question a lot of the ideas we had about God from our upbringing. Many of those ideas were given to us with good intentions. They were framed in the most positive way they could be under that theological system. But a lot of those conclusions are kind of like, they're like solving the theological math problem. So when it comes to like penal substitution, for example, it feels to me like when you're trying to explain it to a kid. Richard Feynman said, if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, you really don't understand it yourself.
That's it.
So
love that.
When I'm thinking about how to explain to my kids the nature of God's forgiveness, this was even before I had kids, but I was processing with Jared. It really doesn't make sense on a 5-year-old's level that, there would be this need for retributive justice, and that God would have to separate and harm his son in order to be able to forgive someone else, and to kind of transmit guilt in order to transmit to the other person righteousness. And there was some beauty in those ideas because it was what I grew up with. And I was very thankful that Jesus would be willing to love me that much. Yeah. But it really did alienate me from his Father. I felt like,
that's right. Yeah.
I felt like Jesus and the Father were two different people. And then it was really when I was reading Matthew, and Jesus says, he encourages us to ask and seek and knock. And then he says, if you being evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more does your heavenly Father give good gifts to those who ask? Yeah. And it struck me, this idea that Jesus entrusted us. Jesus assumes we have the capacity to understand what goodness is and what the goodness of the Father would look like from the way we love our own children.
Come on, man.
And so there doesn't need to be this twisted, manipulated math that ends up making the Father pretty ugly, because I would never do to my children what my theology told me the Father did to his Son.
Come on.
And that sort of manipulated version of goodness didn't make sense. And so then, because you're left with, the pieces don't fit anymore. Now you have to go through this journey of kind of reapproaching all of these matters and going, well, then what did happen on the cross? And what did it mean to Jesus? And what does that reveal about the Father? And, they were long conversations. But I'm incredibly grateful that I had a friend like Jared who was, to be honest, quite patient with me. Because you're right, we have like a yes and dynamic, but I am the kind of like irresponsible one who kind of goes off the deep end like far too early. I'm like, let's just jump, let's just go for it. And Jared's like, that's great, Connor. Love you for it, but let me bring some ideas in here. And I'm not saying that he's a spoil sport. He's not at all. But he brings a level of maturity and thoughtfulness that I sometimes lack in my own rush to new ideas and conclusions.
Well, and Connor, the PhD in the room here, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, he keeps me safe.
Slow moving is not always the best moving, though. Connor often gets to places that I get to much earlier, so I'm thankful to be pushed along a little bit.
He's like my designated driver in a sense, really.
When you're too drunk, he has the keys.
That's right.
Yeah. So many kind words on our 10-year anniversary, Connor. This is just so kind of you. I think that was really well said, and that's been a big paradigm shift for me, is moving from a contractual theological system to a covenantal system, which plays, then everything's in play at that point, and you have to understand what we mean when we talk about faith, which is a thing, you tell your kids from a very young age, okay, you've got to just give this mental assent and this agreement, this cognitive agreement with a certain set of ideas, and then that is a transaction. It unlocks something, which then comes back to you. But hey, it's not works. This is not a religion of works, but you do have to do these things. And by the way, you can just make yourself believe something, which we know that's not really how it works. If you don't believe something, you can't believe something. You can pretend and you can declare, and you can decree.
Bootstrap it.
Yeah. But authentic belief in something, which is what we would say faith is, or what people would say faith is, That's not something you can drum up and muster up out of sheer force. So anyways, these are the sorts of things that we're trying to avoid these potholes for these kids at a very young age, so that we can present a different system entirely, a one that's based on, again, covenant instead of contract, so that they are accepted as the bottom layer, and then we build on that rather than you get to the end and then you almost got stricken, but the son was, and and I was even thinking with kids' obsessions with fairness. At least I don't know about your past experience, but with siblings and everything needs to be fair.
Oh yeah.
I mean, when you look at the cross, goodness gracious, what we have taught, it doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. And yeah, Connor, as you said, just interrogating these ideas and approaching them in a different way, it's important.
One of the things that we decided early on in this process of writing the series, and it will be a series. The next one is scheduled for release around this time next year. Awesome. Each time it's going to be about Jesus. It's going to be his life, his teaching, and then how the cross and resurrection reflects that aspect of his teaching.
Beautiful.
So every time we're bringing them to that, and we're helping them with the introduction to the God who looks like Jesus. But we're not trying to force, as Jared said, them to come to a decision about faith, because that's not how faith works. But also, early on in the process, we decided that one of our core values as surprise kids authors, which we never expected to be, was Jesus says, "Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them." Yeah. And I think a lot of people believe in the "let the little children come to me" part. They want kids to come to Jesus, but they don't realize all the ways that our expectations, our theology, and our habits or traditions are actually hindering kids. Yeah. So we say, hey, this is what God looks like, but also you need to believe X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, this is what we would like you to follow in, as God revealed in Jesus, but also we'd like you to adopt these theologies. And we just said, you know what? Even if they're right, even if those theologies are right, they could become conditions. Whereas if we just bring kids to Jesus and just show them what he's like, there's going to be further questions, because like when I showed the book to my son, I read it to him for the first time when it was still not even colored yet. Yeah. And I said, "Hey, bud, what do you think?" And he goes, "I like it, Dad. It was pretty funny, but I'm not entirely convinced." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "The whole forgiveness thing." He's like, I still think I might prefer the punches and the kicks." I'm like, "Oh, really?" Now he's not at all violent, right?
Right.
But we've been going through the Marvel movies, right? And
sure.
I'm like, "Oh, okay. So what? Unpack that for me. What do you mean by that?" He's like, "Yeah, He's like, I get it, but it just feels a bit soft for me." He's like, "I really like it when Captain America just socks him in the face," and I was like, "I get it, man. I like it too. I'm not saying that you have to throw those ideas away, but like I'm just introducing you to these other ideas." And he was like, okay, I'll keep thinking about it.
I love that conversation. I think I said it while we were recording, but I'm still having those with my kids at adult ages. But I love it. Here will I sing. Oh. Hey guys, interrupting for a second. Glad you're here. So thankful for this podcast, thankful to get to do this with friends, thankful for Derek and all of those who've navigated it with us. Listen, this podcast is done under our nonprofit, A Family Story. 12 years ago, I had a vision and I wrote it down. I'm going to read it to you. Family Story is a relational community of creatives, family and friends. I see all of us as creatives. We do life together. We envision and express God's love through our gifting and grace. We are worshipers, dreamers, storytellers, and preachers, a family of dads and moms, brothers and sisters, daughters and sons, united by a passion to know and reveal God's perfect love. I feel like I'm seeing the fulfillment of some of that vision 12 years ago. The mandate on A Family Story was to create media content catalytic for an encounter with the love of God. afamilystory.org is our website. I encourage you to go there. There's a whole lot of media content there. There's books and articles, there's films, some music, and this podcast. That's the home of Rethinking God with Tacos, which is pretty dang cool. It's been life-giving, as I said, the community around it, the community of creatives, of family and friends that's growing. It's blown me away. And so I'm thankful. I'm thankful for all the relationships, connections, and I'm thankful for all those who've given. Rethinking God with Tacos is listener-supported. If you'd like to support us, you can go to afamilystory.org. Again, we're a nonprofit. And I would encourage you to join us on our Facebook group. Follow us on Instagram, all the socials. If you're curious how to find me on the socials, it's at Jason Clark is. Otherwise, like, share, write a review on iTunes or Spotify. Tell your mom. We really are loving doing this, and I'm so thankful for everyone here. All right, it's time to get back to the podcast. You know, consent is how we interact with each other. That's the high water. That's what love is. It operates in the context of consent. And so the idea that you're inviting them to the table, you know, you mentioned it. We were raised with a Jesus that was loving and kind, but because of some of our theological understandings, that penal substitutionary atonement theory, we had to do mental gymnastics, even at a young age, around the nature of God. And of course, eventually, you know, if you get older, you either have to shut some things down and get rigid and build things on your certainties, or, you know, have a rethink and rediscover who he is. And I think we're in the middle of that right now. But I do love, Jared, your take on faith, because as a young man, I would have said faith looked like jumping out of an airplane. You know, the act of jumping out of an airplane, but really faith is about what you have on your back. Otherwise, you're just a moron. And I did a whole lot of jumping without anything on my back. You know what I'm saying? Which comes back to it's the fruit of a relational connection instead of a transactional one. It's the fruit of love. And realizing he's good. He's really good. He can be trusted. He is good. He can be trusted, which it actually would then empower you to take the leap in the first place.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good, Jason. And, you know, so my particular field is on Paul, you know, and obviously there's faith language is used throughout the whole New Testament, of course, or and the Old. But again, you know, I'm just looking at Paul for most of my research, and not only did our ideas of faith need to be reconsidered, just in terms of what that word means, but also there was quite a critical shift for me in realizing there's a certain phrase that has been translated in justification text and saying it is our faith in God that unlocks our justification. And we won't get into the weeds, but the Greek phrase is pistis Christou, and both words are in the genitive. And when you put two genitive nouns together, it unlocks multiple possibilities. And so there's a debate on whether it's our faith in Christ or it is the faith of Christ or the faithfulness of Christ. And both of them are grammatically possible. So then you have to turn to the theological context of what Paul's doing. And it's a lot in Galatians and a lot in Romans where Paul uses this phrase. But there's an emerging consensus in scholarship towards the construal that is the faith of Christ that then, you know, has justified us, or even how you want to translate the word for justified. That's contested as well, but it could be has delivered us, which is a beautiful way of looking at that as well. Rather than a courtroom metaphor, it's more of a slavery and freedom view. But just even just that, like it's not just that we are moving away from it just being a mental assent that we have to do, but it's also just going in this system that I'm in this theological system. The faithfulness of Christ is doing the heavy lifting. And then the word faith, it's a relational term. It was used in non-religious settings and just in terms of people, having trust and mutual loyalty, things like that. And so it's the faithfulness of Christ has done the heavy lifting in terms of the process of salvation. And then we, of course, do respond with our trust, like Abraham did, because he heard the promise and goes, oh, wow, I trust and I'm loyal now. But he didn't muster it up. He heard this radical promise that you will be the father of many, And so that's why Paul cites Abraham and goes, hey, you've heard the gospel. You've heard the truth about the faithfulness of Christ and the events surrounding Easter. And so now respond, not because it's unlocking justification or salvation for you, but because you're in a relationship.
Come on.
And of course you're going to respond to this. This is what Christ has done for you. This is the faith or the pistis of Christ.
Come on.
And then now you get to participate and join in because of what he's done. And that shift in the system is like, it's a game changer. And it's not a contractual thing anymore. It's a more of a covenantal thing, which is, again, it's a totally different thing.
It's a response. It's a relational response.
Yeah.
He's done the heavy lifting. I mean, come on, man. There's a reason we call it the good news.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that you've had, some people that I consider heroes who really helped unlock it for me. Baxter Kruger, a guy named Andre Rabe was really influential in my life, has been for many years. The idea that much more important than what we believe about God is what God believes about us, and what Jesus believes about his Father.
Yeah.
Part of the underpinning desire we had in writing these kids' books was to make that plain for kids, because a lot of people think that Jesus' teaching is for the adults. And, it's my personal belief. This is certainly extra biblical, but it's my belief that Jesus ran the kids ministry while the disciples did the miracles, right? He sends them out and then he just hangs out with the kids. And so when it comes to his teaching, the underpinning reality of his teaching is what Jesus believes about his Father. He's revealing that to his disciples and to his followers.
Yeah.
And in John, we really want to say, I am the way, the truth, and the life, right? But we don't actually finish the passage, let Jesus speak for himself.
Yeah.
When they say, well, show us the Father. And Jesus's response is, but you've already seen the Father because you've been with me.
Yeah.
And so there's this idea that we sometimes feel super intimidated to teach the teaching of Jesus to kids or to really get into the details. But if you let kids see and experience what Jesus believes about his Father and what Jesus believes about us, according to Jesus in John, the proximity they have to that experience, because like you said earlier, they know what it's like to be in the Father's lap. They know what it's like to be loved and celebrated and to belong. It's like that experience is actually the substance. It's the reality that where faith gets sparked in them for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that relational dynamic it's that encounter. It's more real than the theological constructs that then we're raised to have to strive or grow up in. I think when you're that young, it's not hard to know what's true. I do love that your son, wants the kicking and the fighting and I mean, some of that's the world we're raised in, but I also know that well, at least from my own experience, and I'm sure you guys can speak to it, that, my kids, as they get older, that doesn't hold up. And you start having conversations, about the world we're in. I mean, the world we're in, there is great evil, and you start having actual, how do we actually solve this? And you begin to have that conversation about a retributive or a violent response. And, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. I mean, that's the reality that Jesus was confronting, even in Peter, who had that same mindset, had a belief that and you guys hit this in the book, that when Jesus came back to defeat the enemy, I wrote a book called I'll come back. I wrote a book called God Is Not in Control. The whole story is better than you think. One of the folks that came to me said, how do we win in the end? How do we win in the end if he can't control, if he can't defeat the end? And I said, it happened 2,000 years ago at a cross when he laid his life down. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that Jesus came to throw over Rome, that he came to establish a physical, live by the sword kingdom of control, of domination, was confronted head on, day in, day out. But then we have this snapshot in the Garden of Gethsemane that you guys so brilliantly show us in this book with fart cannons and sharks. That desire, and I do it in Leaving and Finding Jesus. I do that. I start that chapter off explaining, and if you read it for a half a second, you'll think I'm breaking down what took place in the garden. But eventually, when Jesus pulls out the samurai sword and beheads the high priest, at that point you're going, wait, what's going on here? And then angels show up in spandex with lasers and ray guns, and he ends up hanging bodies. It's definitely a rated R version. It's a Tarantino version as opposed to a children's version. But it was the same idea. They had a belief that was how Jesus was going to do it, and he destroys evil. And he reveals on earth as it is in heaven through the laying down of his life. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the gospel. I know you can speak to that, guys. I know there's not a question here, but
no, I mean, I just, how at the bottom of Amazon pages it'll say people also ordered. I feel like they should order ours in a package. They need to order your book and our kids' book together. No, I think it's beautiful. You're just making me think about the book of Revelation, which is a book that's usually you don't lick your finger and turn straight to that when your kids sit down for reading at night. Like, all right, well, let's go to the final battle. However, it's a book that I've began to increasingly love over the last, I'd say, 6 months to a year. One, because I had to do a lecture on it, and I was like, all right, I got to roll up my sleeves and really get in here. But I think I just, when you talk about how does he win in the end, and you're quite right that there's a way in which, that happened on Easter. Because that was the final victory. And then there's another vision of, when you're just looking on in a linear sense, where we see the slain lamb and his army of martyrs, and it's all of their blood, and there's a big wine press, which people usually interpret as the enemy's getting crushed and their blood spilling out, and it's like, oh my goodness, this is so bloody. But if you just slow down and read, it's the blood of the martyrs, and then it's the nations that drink the blood, which I realize this is quite a graphic podcast. Sorry, Jason. But when you read, they drink the blood of the martyrs, and they experience the wrath of realizing we have been forgiven and loved, and we have killed those who profess Christ, and it is their undoing and their forgiving while they consume the truth of this laid down loving army that has followed the Lamb. And you're like, so more and more self-sacrificial love, and this emptying, this kenosis is, we just see that expanding, I think. And it both started and finished on the cross, and then we're kind of helping iron out the details in between, as his army of laid down lovers. And I can't really connect that to kids reading right now, but you're just making me think about the book of Revelation. I'm like, oh man, it's a letter that's quite scary for people to approach, and they think of it as the most bloody. But then when you realize it's bloody because it's a bunch of slain lamb followers, then it's quite beautiful.
Come on. Well, and I think it does tie in that, I'd noted that, our kids like the superhero movies, as you said, Connor, but as they get older, they realize that as you start breaking down these complicated, I have conversations with my son about the state of the world today. And he might come in with a sword swinging with some of his ideology of how to fix it, but then you get to break it down, and it doesn't math. It doesn't math. You realize it doesn't add up, and that the only solution for any complicated subject is, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. It is the laying down, is other-centered, self-giving love that operates in the context of mutuality. It's totally. It is a transform. So I mean, that's what you guys wrote about. That was the invitation.
Well, and for me, I think another reason why it fits is a lot of Christians don't actually want Jesus to be as forgiving as he is. They don't mind him being temporarily forgiving for a period of time. They'll even call it like a dispensation of grace or whatever. Right. But then they're hoping for another God to be revealed in the end times that is not forgiving like Jesus, but is more retributive, who's out for blood, Yeah. And the angels say to the disciples, this same Jesus who you saw ascend will return.
Yeah.
And so the fundamental nature of Christ's nature is not going to change in the end times. And I know books like ours lead some parents to be like, well, if this is all true about God's love and forgiveness, if this is really what Jesus is like, then what about in the book of Revelation? What happens in the end?
Yeah.
But really the underpinning question there is this way of forgiveness, is this way of nonviolent peacemaking and a willingness to suffer if necessary, is that really going to work? And that's ultimately what the question is. We're not sure whether the Lamb has actually won, and we so easily lose faith in the idea that his sacrifice, his suffering, really was enough, not just to forgive us, but to actually restore our enemies. And so we're tempted to pick up the sword again and go, it was really nice that I'm forgiven, but I'd really like you to come back and lead me in battle to defeat the bad guys. Yeah. And kids know this. We look at the state of our world and we grieve over the suffering that's happening. But I think we're called to be faithful to the way of Jesus and to really trust, even in spite of how painful it is sometimes, to really trust that his way of forgiveness is both now and in the end what redeems the world and what brings a full reconciliation to all of the suffering. Jesus said, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. And there are people like, well, I'm a sheep, but with a wolf's attitude. Or, I heard a pastor once be like, I'm not a sheep, I'm a sheepdog, and I'm here to defend the sheep. I'm like, you're totally that's not the point. The point is they want to devour us. But like Jared said, in that devouring, there is a redemption. And I don't believe that Jesus wastes a single drop of his blood. I don't believe he wastes a single drop of the blood of those who suffer for a more peaceful, a more just, a more equitable world.
Yeah.
And we have to ultimately trust that if we're going to be followers of the Jesus way.
And I'll just add one quick thing. Yeah, exactly. Yes, and Connor, in my journey towards embracing kind of I kind of like to think of it more of just actually loving your enemies, but some people would call it Christian pacifism. But I'm like, it's just kind of loving your enemies, like the Sermon on the Mount said. It's some people are tempted to only entertain obeying it or doing that based on if it looks like it's working. So it's kind of called like pragmatic pacifism. So you weigh up, will it work? So will it actually end the war if we don't fight back. And so you end up kind of putting the commands of Jesus on trial on if it can be pragmatically measured as successful in the here and now or in the near future. And that's just, I had a little bit of that working in me, trying to defend how actually it can be really successful, and actually trying to give more and more examples of how being peaceful can actually stop conflict. And while that's true, and while it's helpful to expand our imaginations in terms of what it can do in terms of the redemption and things like that, ultimately, you don't want to be standing on that branch as your main thing, like, hey, it is effective, because ultimately it was effective when he did it. And we have to kind of just go, he commanded it. This is the life he demonstrated. This is what he taught. This is what we see his disciples doing, all of them being martyred. And you go, I'm not going to just do this if I think I can prove or measure that it's going to work in the here and now. In the end, this is, so I've kind of embraced a bit of a different way of viewing it than I used to in this journey of kind of peacemaking. Yeah.
No, I love that. I mean, we're having a conversation where you said it, Connor. I think your son said he seems a little soft. Is that the word?
Yeah, Jesus seems a little bit soft to him sometimes.
A little bit soft to him sometimes. I mean, I've had that thrown at me. Hey, we live in the real world. The Jesus you're preaching seems a little bit soft, and I there's one thought is I mean, he died. It was brutal, and then he rose. So we're not having a conversation about a wishy-washy love here. We're having a conversation about resurrection life. We're having a conversation about stepping into our delusion, into the darkest, most broken places of our fractured humanity, of our lack of our fractured lens on who he is, and setting us free from that lie, and then inviting us into the truth of who we truly are. So there's nothing soft about it. It does cost us everything. He said, take up your cross and follow me. He was inviting us into a resurrection life, but he was inviting us into living from the completed work, the finished work. What does that look like practically? I'm with you, Jared. It's a complicated reality. I'm fascinated in the world we live in. I want to live, in one sense, I'm fascinated by Jesus sleeping in a boat, because that is the freedom, the high watermark to me of what freedom looks like, liberty looks like, self-control, union, all of it. I can be in a boat. I have the ability to calm the storm, but that's not what my Father's doing. Peace actually allows for me to sleep in this moment. And then there's the other side where Jesus braids a whip. And I'm also fascinated by that story. Now, he never does it outside of cruciform love. He doesn't step outside of a greater love that lays his life down for his friends. He doesn't react. He responds. I mean, this is days, years in the making. He steps away. It's not about violently making contact with people. It is about it is a forceful way in which to step between what is broken and what is happening. There is an element, you can't deny that, but it's never stepped outside of Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Both those who are on the oppressed side and the oppressor, the person on the other side of the table. Mm-hmm. And so that's the complicated conversation that we're having. When someone asks me if I'm a pacifist, I'm like, yeah, but Jesus, I'm a pacifist in the sense that I'm convinced it's finished. I live in this world. I do think that there is a love that can be trusted, that will step in between oppressor and oppressed. It's a unique conversation, one that I think we need lots of grace and wisdom, and fathers and mothers convinced in a Father who didn't look away, and a God who's reconciling all things to himself. That's the peacemaker, Jesus. I mean, we're having a deep conversation here. You guys wrote a kid's book, and here we are. I don't have answers. I don't have, but no. I love the conversation, because these are things that fascinate me. Totally. And we're looking for folks who are convinced in that, and in the finished work of God, so convinced, because they're the ones that actually have solutions to some of these huge issues today.
Right.
Yeah. And go ahead, Connor.
And I was just going to add that, we hear, when we began to advocate more and more for peacemaking, the story of Jesus making a whip in the temple became something that a lot of people needed to process. And
Sure.
I agree with you that the actual practice of being a peacemaker in the world is more complicated than just saying, well, I'm going to abstain from using all forms of violence. First of all, you have to ask yourself the question, like, what is violence, right? Like, is a parent yanking their kid out of the street away from an oncoming car a form of violence?
Yeah.
We would all say no, right?
Right.
But there's a difference between, it's forceful. It's coercive, but it's ultimately leading to the child's health and not their harm, right?
Yeah.
So it's as soon as you go from theory and you go into practice, it becomes much more complicated.
Yeah.
I tend to subscribe to a guy named Brian Sond. Really helped me understand that John, the book of John, is really showing us Jesus engaging in prophetic theater. The way Jeremiah did as an act of protest, that anyone who was actually violent in the temple, we know from other gospel stories that they got cut down right away. The guards would, the Romans would not allow, because any uprising would start in the temple, right? So they would not allow any real violence to take place. And I think Brian says that the whip was made because the Gospel of John is the only place where the animals are mentioned. So he's using the whip to move the animals or whatever.
Yes.
Regardless of what you think about that particular passage, when the disciples are getting ready, when they're going to Gethsemane, Jesus makes sure that they have a sword. Peter goes to use the sword, and Jesus immediately prohibits the use of the sword.
Yeah. And
as you said earlier, those who live by the sword die by the sword. In our book, we have Jesus say, this isn't how we win, Peter. Because, the metaphor, the poetic language Jesus is using, we weren't sure if it would translate for kids. Yeah. But I really do think that the journey toward nonviolent peacemaking is less about getting into the weeds of the theory. And it's more about this idea that the way I look at it is Jesus wants us to carry a sword that we don't use. Meaning, Jesus invites us to understand our capacity to coerce and control other people.
Yeah, he told them to go get a sword.
Right. So it means that we are all powerful. Like, we are all able to make choices. Yeah. And we are all asked to not use our power, to not use our sword to inflict harm on other people.
Yeah. Good.
So when people say, like, well, what would happen if a robber broke into your house? Obviously, as a parent, I'm going to do whatever I need to do. But my hope is that by the guidance of the Holy Spirit, I wouldn't use my power to inflict harm on the situation. Yeah. That whatever power I had would be used to stop evil from happening rather than perpetuate it by my own violence. And what's fun about this is that kids actually intuit this better than adults do, because they're not thinking about it in terms of theory. Yeah. And so we're just using this book as an opportunity to call people like, hey, everyone is made in the image and likeness of God, regardless of what you believe about Christian pacifism or the violent nature of our world. Yeah. Ultimately, each one of us can make the world a better place if we use the power that we've been given. If we identify that and we go, instead of using it to try to control others or coerce them, I'm going to use it to try to bring peace to the situation.
Beautiful. I like that, Connor. I can see your brains going, Jared.
I'm decided not to do a yes and. I'm just going to a period. Of course, there's thoughts, but Connor, that's brilliant. No, I'm done.
It is beautiful. Yeah, I think that's a full circle, and I imagine that if I got in on your voicemail chain, we'd be doing this for many more hours.
Well, you're always welcome.
We'll have to start one.
I'm really grateful for you guys. Grateful for this book. I really am. We don't need any more Christian content that propagates separation and retribution, and we need so much more of what you guys are working on, both for our kids and for our adults, and so I was excited to have this conversation. I knew it would get deep. I didn't know we'd get to Revelation, but I like that too.
Whoops.
I love it. I love it. I'm grateful to Jared for your friendship. It's grown. I think we met 10 years ago, probably around that time. So
you too, Jason.
Hey, so we got this book. It's out. This podcast will release probably a month afterwards, but it was fun to catch you right on the cusp of it. Congratulations. I'm excited that it's the first in a series.
Thanks.
And pray and joy over it. How do people, we can't, hold on. Before, how do people find you? We haven't talked tacos.
Oh.
And we've definitely rounded third here. It's Rethinking God with Tacos. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask for your taco story. It can be good, bad, or ugly.
Well, my taco story is that, up in Canada, in the cold prairies, we don't get a lot of great tacos, unfortunately. But I love them. And yes. I eat tacos any chance I can get. Like I said, they're a little different here. But my kids, particularly my son, he's a little bit more on the picky side. He's learning. He's trying new things.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, we tried to get him to try a taco, and he was just not interested. And then we brought home one of the white people taco kits from Costco with the chicken and the cabbage and whatever. And
hey, no shame, man. No shade. It's all
hey,
right.
It counts. So this one time we put all the ingredients on his plate, and we're like, hey, just try a little bit of this. You can eat it in pieces, because he likes all the pieces, right?
Right.
And so finally, I think he might have taken a bite of his mom's at our insistence. And his first reaction was his eyes go wide, and he's like, this is what tacos have been this whole time? And we're like, yes, this is it, man. And he's like, oh, I love this. So now we almost have to buy 2 kits, because he'll literally eat like 6 tacos. He's 9 years old. He's just a taco machine. So yeah, I think tacos are, perhaps God's greatest, the best food to celebrate all of these ideas we've been discussing.
That's a salvation experience right there. You got them saved.
That's right. Yeah. He discovered the reality. We didn't have to get him to mentally ascend to it.
You led him to water.
That's
and he
right.
drank.
That's right.
I love it.
Gosh.
What you got, Jared?
So this is not a story per se, but I've somehow it hit my algorithm. Maybe it knew that I was going to be on this podcast soon. I'm not sure, but I started seeing videos of this guy doing this challenge where he had a hard taco, and his friend challenged him across a series of days. I don't know if it was 30 days or 40 days, but he would have to eat a taco each day, one-handed, but with 0 spills. So like nothing can fall on the plate or the table whatsoever. So he's just eating these super slow bites and trying to get his way through. And I think so far there's been a bit of a break and a drip each time. And I'm like, I think I got to try this. So I don't know if that would be fun to see you and Derek give that a try on film. But just to see,
taco challenge,
a whole hard taco, no spillage whatsoever, nothing hits the plate. Well,
I love it, man. I love that's a great taco story, because that's a taco challenge right there.
Yeah.
And challenge accepted.
Okay.
I mean, that's a taco a day is a beautiful thing anyway. So
I mean, it's the rules. So
it's the rule. When we started the podcast, Rethinking God with Tacos, it was so that when I had PhD folks on like you, they would know that they weren't dealing with their equal, that they'd have to dumb it down so that we could. I mean, I'm being funny, but it was both for us to be able to say, hey, this is a relational podcast, obviously, and then I had learned years ago, if you put it in your book that you like strawberry rhubarb pie, then when you go speak somewhere, it's possible that someone can get you strawberry rhubarb pie.
I'm sure.
So I like tacos.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's smart. That's fine. That's PhD level thinking right there.
Chess, right there, 3D chess.
I love it. 3D chess. Hey, so where do we find the book? Where do we find you guys before we step away?
Well, thankfully, it's kind of just anywhere you buy books. So if you Google Jesus versus, and that'll probably get you there, honestly. So all the normal websites. And then I think you asked where you find us. I hang out on Instagram, and that's kind of my space. Yeah. And then Connor, I don't know if you want to announce what's not.
Give your tag though, Jared. It's spell your name because it's Jared Neusch, but it's not how it.
Yeah. So JaredNeusch.
Yeah.
I hope you spelled that correctly.
Yeah. Exactly. I think he did.
We'll see.
I think he did. Yeah.
And then Connor, I don't know if you want to also announce something that in real time we haven't announced, but by the time this pod is out, it will have been announced. The club that we're going to be inviting people into. Well.
I'm sorry, I was not. We did not prepare for this part, but we are also found on JesusIsForKids.com. That's the name of this book's series, and so you can find out more about the book there. We also have coloring pages we made from each page of the book. So if you want those for your kids or your children's ministry, we're hoping to develop a kind of mini kids curriculum around the themes of the book. We've got that in the works. But yeah, by the time this podcast will air, we'll also have launched the Peaceful Parents Club, which will be a weekly newsletter devoted to the topics of peacemaking, parenting, a little bit of pop culture in there as well. It's got theology, it's got scriptures and quotes on peacemaking, and then it's also got a lot of fun because these topics have to be not just enjoyable for kids but enjoyable for families. And we're not the experts, but we just hope to connect people with resources, families with resources that help them on their journey into the Jesus way of peace.
Beautiful. I love it, guys. What an amazing thing. These are the kind of resources that we're hungry for and in need of. And we were talking before we got on of this. There's just Jesus' perfect theology. When you start taking that to its conclusion, and God is good as Jesus reveals, we're now generations in. I think a great awakening or a very large yes and is right now in the ether. I feel it. It's good. And so grateful to have this conversation with you guys. Great to meet you, Connor.
Great to meet you too.
Just appreciate you guys taking the time to come do this with me.
Thank you so much.
For having us, Jason. Yeah.
We'll do it again. Hey guys. Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the podcast, myself, or our guests, you can go to afamilystory.org. You can also go to afamilystory.org if you'd like to give. This is a listener-supported podcast, and we are incredibly grateful for your generosity. Hey, we have a Facebook group, and it's pretty cool. Rethinking God with Tacos. You can join us over there. Lots of incredible conversation and community taking place on that page. And you can also follow us on all the socials, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and others. Hey, I'd love it also if you went on iTunes and left a review or shared or tweeted or liked the podcast. Let your friends know that this is a good place to hear about the love of God. I pray grace and wonder over your day.